Hey there, investors and traders. Happy New Year. Um, Welcome to the first Finance Friday episode. I'm going to do this little practice for the duration of 2026 and kind of determine whether it's useful and whether I enjoy it. I will not necessarily publish these on Fridays, but I begin my analysis on Friday. So it's always going to be relative to the discipline that I have at the end of the week. I like to see what's happened in the markets during the week, and do some work on that over the weekend. Um, I'm in my thumbnail picture here. I've got on, this is an old picture of me with my gold tie. And that is symbolic because, wow, in 2025, what a run alternatives and metals have had. I've seen that trend kind of get choppier and weaker um, as we've ended the year. But I have a sense that I don't think it's going to fall off altogether. I think there'll be some continuance um, here. I have some theories about that, but I don't want to wrap up our time currently talking about it. So that's about all I'll say for that for now. But anyways, I thought the gold tie was appropriate. And the buddy that's in my picture, he's an ultra marathon runner, and so that's a good reminder that our main asset, we as asset managers, our main asset is just our own health. So that's all I have to say about the thumbnail that I chose for this week. But anyways, happy New Year to you. A practice that I have that may be something that you find of interest. But either way, this is how I practice my investments. In my taxable accounts, I like to have a basket of ETFs. I do not have to monitor the rebalances that way, and they can rebalance on their own based off the rules. You can go look up the perspectives of the ETFs and read about the rules, how they choose what gets included, how they make decisions about what gets excluded, how they um, allocate as far as maybe are they equal weighted or are they weighted by some other decision tree. Um, so I won't go into that in detail about what I'm holding, but I'll just plant the seed that feel free to go read the perspectives because that really is where you kind of can get a decision about whether it's an ETF that fits with your philosophy. As far as for myself, what you see here is what you get. These are the ETFs I choose to hold myself. I also hold a Dimensional Advisors DFIV, which is a international value ETF. I like the way that Dimensional Advisors thinks. I like the way they think. I like the way they evaluate their due diligence, their analysis. So if I were actually doing the work, it's more aligned with how I would choose to do that due diligence. So that's why I like to hold them. But since I don't trade a lot of those symbols, because I'm not, well, I guess through Interactive Brokers, I could be on some of those exchanges, but I, I really haven't chosen to. I just stay on our local exchanges. Um, so I'm not going to share the here because what I'm sharing here is a practice that I have where I like to keep an eye on what is carrying the index. So a discipline that I have is I keep an eye whether it's on the ETF themselves, the ETFs themselves, or the symbols within the ETFs. I like to keep an eye on what's the trend, what's the momentum, what's the health in the trend and the momentum, what's the retention of that, and I just think that it always points. Number one, it might point to what you want to hold, but it also points to it's a time management tool to know what to go look up. If something's trending, hey, it's trending. If something's having a pullback, um, that can range from anything from just basic market volatility to actually being meaningful on a larger scale. So if I see some kind of change that's really noteworthy, then I'll go look that up so that I can make decisions about what I hold in my tax preferred accounts. But typically in my tax preferred accounts, I'm holding individual symbols and I'm rebalancing those on a monthly basis. I'm keeping an eye on them on a weekly basis, but I don't make any changes that often unless it's from a risk management standpoint because I see something truly has changed with a symbol that I'm holding. Otherwise, I just am looking at trend health relative to trend and momentum, and I hold the individual names so that whatever's carrying the ETF, I like to kind of go along with it. So I let the market lead instead of me thinking that I'm wise enough to know a whole lot. So with that said, some of these next images will just show you as we closed out the week ending Friday, January 2nd, 2026. We'll be able to see what was leading the S&P 500, what was leading the Qs, what was leading the mid cap, what was leading as far as within the S&P 500, that little segment that is kind of defined as being currently valued, or at least at the time of its inclusion. I'd have to look at their recycle the period. But SPGP is a GARP. GARP is growth at a reasonable price. So they like to kind of look at what is the growth of the company and what are you paying for that growth, and are you, if it were to be included, are you buying it at a reasonable price? So, and then I also have some momentum factor ETFs that I like to kind of have sprinkled into my ETF holdings in my taxable accounts. So SPMO is a momentum basket that is specifically focused on by their definition, which is typically like a 6-month definition, the momentum within the S&P 500. And then there's also XMMO, which is momentum within the mid-cap segment. I'd have to reacclimate myself to kind of the way they define their momentum rules. I'm not really sure on that. But as of January 2nd, 2026, what you see in these next images are who's kind of leading. Not that a whole lot's been happening, but I can kind of cover it with you. Over the last 63 days, so that's say the last quarter, mid-cap momentum ETF, XMMO, is up 3.6%. The mid-cap just general basket and the S&P 500, both of those together, they're up 2.39, basically 2.3 to about 2.5%. The Qs are up 1.25%. SPGP, growth at a reasonable price, it really hasn't had a lot of movement. It's up 0.25%. And SPMO, interestingly enough, doesn't really surprise me because the S&P 500 is such a big movement in the overall market, and so you would expect that for whether it's a downward trend or an upward trend, the momentum segment of that would probably be somewhat of a leading indicator. And anyways, it is down over the last quarter 0.68%. But all of those percentage movements over the last quarter is a mixture, of course, of symbols that are trending up, symbols that are kind of being choppy and going sideways, and symbols that are kind of falling and going on a downward trajectory. So the numbers I just said are kind of the net effect or the net physics of all those transactions. So I like to look, even though I just let the whole basket run, for better or for worse, in my taxable account, in my tax preferred accounts, and I have a couple of those. I like to really look under the hood and see what's running with the healthiest trend, what's running with the healthiest sense of momentum, and just kind of hold those leaders. So if I come over here, I'll give you an example of when I talk about kind of the net effect of those baskets. So XMMO is the momentum ETF that is looking at just the prime momentum within the mid cap. Well, there's 79 symbols within that ETF, whereas the mid cap ETF, just in general, is 401 symbols. And like with the S&P 500, well, we kind of know that's roughly 500 symbols. I actually see 502. Yet the momentum segment of the S&P 500 that's held in SPMO, the momentum ETF, is effectively 100 symbols. The way I track it, I'm tracking 99 of those symbols. SPGP, which is growth at a reasonable price. Well, there's only 75 symbols within that. So, I guess based off the way they choose to look at things, they look at the S&P 500 and they say, well, I only think 75 of these are kind of rightly priced, which is interesting. So I don't think that you'd expect that ETF basket. I hold it as a basket. I hold it in my taxable account, but logically you wouldn't expect that basket to win because they always would be recycling back to that rightly priced. Now, I guess it could win in the same way that the turtle beats the hare. But no, but typically it's not. But it's a great one to keep an eye on just for individual holdings, because it can tell you what to buy now and just keep holding even whenever it starts getting overpriced. If unless you're just completely against holding anything overpriced. Anyways, guys, that's what you're going to see here. You're going to see the leaders of the S&P 500. You're going to see the leaders of the Qs. You're going to see the leaders of the mid-cap portion of the market. You're going to see kind of as far as a rightly priced based off of SPGP's definitions. You're going to see the leaders within that segment. And then as far as what's already defined as a momentum element of the mid caps and a momentum element of the S&P 500, of what they've already defined as a momentum play, what's the leadership as far as kind of currently in the moment holding the best, the healthiest trend and momentum line. Like I said, I like to look at these on a weekly basis, but that's only for risk management. I'll never make changes in my tax preferred accounts. Even if a symbol's going down and losing some money, I just let it do its thing. Unless I look into it and find out that there's a really identifiable reason, that it's very clear to me that something's changed. They missed a beat by a significant amount. Their guidance has changed by a significant amount. Just something truly thematic has occurred. Otherwise, I just treat it as typical market volatility, and I rebalance on a monthly basis into leadership. So I like to hold leadership for at least a month, unless I see a real strong reason why not to. When I look at my rebalance period on a monthly basis, just because I have that pinned as my kind of defined time from a discipline standpoint to rebalance, it doesn't mean I won't continue holding something. If I like what I see and it is still continuing to show up in the leadership bucket, and I still think that the trend and momentum is healthy enough, or even if it falls just slightly outside of the leadership bucket, if I still like the health and the continuance of the trend and the momentum, I might even choose to stick with it instead of just something else that's just kind of popped up, because it's that stability of trend and momentum that really interests me the most. But that's all I've got for this week, guys. I wish you a blessed 2026, and we'll chat again. You guys have a great one. If you have any insight into the symbols shown here and have any interesting information, put it in the comments below. I'm a nerd about that sort of thing, so I love to look into it further. I like to go down those rabbit holes. You guys have a great one. Bye for now.